Welcome to the Pivot Clean Energy Podcast, How the World Cooks, the energy shift you need to know about. I'm your host, Alicia El-Mamouni. On this podcast, we are going to explore everything cooking, how it impacts the world, and why you should care. Let's go. David Carpintero joined ePURE as Director General in June of 2022. Previously, he was Director General for a Brussels-based food trade association and has a long international experience in the agricultural sector with postings in Europe and America. ePURE is the united voice of the European renewable ethanol industry and represents their members' interests to the EU institutions, industry stakeholders, the media, and general public. They are partnering with European biorefineries to build a more resilient future in Europe as they reduce carbon emissions, create secure food systems, and ensure energy independence. David is going to guide us as we land in our next global stop, learning about bioethanol production around the world and share some insights on the production and market dynamics in Europe. You will hear how bioethanol started in a meaningful way and some important expansion that's in the works. We'll also discuss how ePURE operates and the importance of the organization in the bioethanol sector for the continent. You'll learn a little about their producers, the types of feedstock they use, and the volumes they produce. David also comments on the social impact and consumer awareness around bioethanol and how that relates back to using the renewable fuel for cooking around the world, as well as the value that the private sector can add to that transition. Listen in to hear about the nuances of the bioethanol sector in Europe and their vision for a cleaner future. Thank you for joining us on How the World Cooks today, David. We are currently doing a series about how bioethanol is produced and used around the world, and so we're really excited to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be with you, Alicia.
So as you know, there can be distinct differences depending on where you're located around the globe. And so we are looking at Asia, Africa, South America, North America, and Europe. And that is the region that you are going to educate us on today. So let's get started.
With pleasure.
You are the Director General at ePURE currently. Can you tell our listeners what is ePURE and where are you guys located at?
So we are ePURE, is the association representing the European producers of renewable ethanol. So we represent the 20 members that produce renewable ethanol from biomass in Europe. And of course, we need to be based in Brussels. This is where all these associations are based. And actually, Alicia, we are based just at the core of the kind of Brussels institutions neighborhood.
Okay.
We are just kind of 10 meters away from Place Schuman, right across the building from the European Commission and the building from the European Council. So right at the heart of
You're in the
European
thick of it.
politics. Absolutely.
That's great. And so you're based in Europe. What geographies do you operate in? Is ePURE strictly a European company, or where do you guys operate?
So our members, which are the companies producing renewable ethanol in Europe, they are really located all over Europe. We have members from Spain to Bulgaria to Lithuania, Sweden, the UK. Our members and their plants where they produce the renewable ethanol are really scattered all over Europe.
Okay, wow. So you really
Including the
encompass
UK.
the entire continent.
Yeah.
And did you say the UK as well?
Yeah, I mean, before Brexit, UK was part of the European Union.
Yep.
So this association normally was looking at the European Union. But after Brexit, I mean, it was decided that they continue being part of our association as well.
Okay, great. So you have a very wide spread. And for you personally, have you always been in the biofuels industry, or what brought you to the position that you're in today?
My background, Alicia, is more on agriculture. So I have a long international career, including in the US with a large multinational in the agricultural space. And I live, for example, first in Europe, in Madrid and in Brussels. Then I moved to Mexico, covering Latin America. Then moved to the US. I was for a while in St. Louis, Missouri. And then came back to Brussels. And my career was more on agriculture. So trying to help to produce more with less. And then I moved to this space of the European trade associations, and I was before ePURE in another association on the food space. It was the association that represents the breakfast cereal manufacturers.
Okay.
So we were using, our members were using corn and wheat and oats to produce breakfast cereals. Now here at ePURE, we continue to produce corn and wheat, but here is to produce both ethanol and food.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, representing European bioethanol, who are some of these constituent groups that are involved with ePure? If you can kind of state what sorts of, is it only bioethanol companies or producers, or who exactly can be involved in your organization?
So any company that produces the renewable ethanol, that's ethanol produced from biomass, is welcome to be our member. In that sense, I think we are representing the vast majority of European producers, and most of our members, Alicia, they are farmer cooperatives.
Okay.
Sometimes very large farmer cooperatives, but still farmer cooperatives. For example, Tereos in France, Crystal Union in France, Crop Energies, which is part of Südzucker, the
Mm-hmm.
large sugar cooperative in Germany. Some of our members are not farmer cooperatives, but we have these two type of members inside.
Okay.
The requisite is always that they have an active production of ethanol from biomass.
And why is it important for them to belong to ePure? How does that benefit them, or what services do you guys provide?
Because we are interacting with a number of European institutions, people developing new policies that at the end will determine this market. At the end, this is a regulated market.
Mm,
And it's important that we communicate with one voice. So we are that one voice that represents our members, and we engage with European institutions, we engage with other stakeholders,
mm-hmm,
and with society overall. Because we have a social value, we think that we need to defend. We are helping
mm,
to the fossilized transport, and we want to make sure this positive contribution to the environment, to society, continues to be understood and recognized.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm just curious how the government and policymakers have responded to that.
Well, Alisa, that's a very good question. When this industry started in Europe close to 20 years ago, uh, there was a lot of political understanding on the role we were playing because we were the single alternative to the fossilized
Mm,
transport, in our case, gasoline
yep.
engines. So the ethanol that we produce, Alicia, it's saving 78% of the emissions from gasoline in this case.
Wow.
So it's a very significant contribution to the fossilized transport, to the fossilized mode.
Hmm.
And this was very well understood and valued. But recently, there has been in Europe a very strong focus to electrification of transport,
Mm,
which is
yeah,
important, is
we can
needed.
relate to that
We,
in the US.
in the US as well. I mean, we need it. The contribution of electrification in transport, we
Yep,
need it. Needs to be part of the solution.
it
But
is.
somehow I think in Europe was misrepresented as being the
Mm,
only alternative,
sure.
in a way that electrification was going to be imposed in all citizens. And I mean, for the moment, I think it's a good solution for some mobility needs, but
Hmm.
probably it's not a single solution for all mobility needs, and probably it's not a solution for all social segments that require mobility.
Hmm.
So I think we need to be very conscious on these social needs and of the role that ethanol in this case plays as being a socially inclusive
Hmm.
option to the fossilized transport.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there's a parallel in the clean cooking sector as well, where, there are multiple clean fuels out there, and electricity is one of those that should definitely be put into the stack. But in a lot of areas, it's just not practical within the next 10, 15 years. And so there needs to be an alternative for individuals to utilize today. And we really see bioethanol filling that space and becoming a piece of the solution. And so, again, you have that how do you create options so that what you're using consists of clean fuels, right? Maybe you're using four different types of fuel or technology, but they're all clean options.
Absolutely. And you're bringing in a very crucial point, which is options. Sometimes we see policymakers approaching problems from a mind of scarcity and restriction,
Hmm.
when it should be a mindset of abundance and options. And I think we can, with science and technology today, we can provide solutions which are both sustainable, socially inclusive, and in your case, safe to use. Which, in
Hmm.
the case of cooking, they are not creating these unfortunate fumes that at the end might bring in some health issues.
Right.
We have the solutions, Alicia. We have them. We just
Yeah,
need to find ways to make them available to people.
exactly. So, that being said, what are a couple of focus areas your organization has identified for the next couple of years that you're really going to work on, whether that's through education or policy?
Internally, for us, is continue this path on our contribution to the fossilization. I mentioned the figure of 78%.
Hmm.
Alicia, 10 years ago, we were at 50%. If we are at 78% now, it's thanks to hard work, a lot of engineering,
Yeah.
continuous effort to continue improving our delivery in this defossilization. And this work is continuing. This work will continue till we get closer and closer to 100% GHG savings.
Hmm.
Alicia, some of my members right now are already close to 95%
Wow.
GHG savings. It's amazing, and it's engineering at play. It's as I said before, people developing solutions. And this work is continuing. We'll continue in the next years and continue this progression in improving this positive contribution that we have to society. And as I said before, in a socially inclusive way.
Hmm.
And the second aspect, Alicia, the second response to your question would be maybe I think for us to continue um, increasing awareness on the value that we create, because sometimes policies, especially recently in some policy work that in Europe is called Fit for 55, um, we've seen some discrimination of biofuels.
Mm.
We've seen electrification being pushed at the expenses or at the expense of biofuels. Let
Sure.
people choose. Let people choose at the end. Don't restrict. This mindset of restriction at the end, I think, doesn't create any social value, and
Right.
we should not be afraid of giving people choices.
Yeah. So having that, it's important to have parity in the marketplace so that all the clean fuels have a chance and that people do have that option to choose what they want.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
When you talked about greenhouse gas emission savings and, your producers, some of them are at like 95%, can you just explain what that means? What are they doing to improve their efficiencies?
So they work especially around higher sustainability and higher circularity in their processes. For example, they use boilers that work with renewable energy,
Hmm.
with biomass energy. They really become much more efficient when it comes to circularity. When you visit, Alicia, one of our biorefineries in Europe, these are great examples of circularity at play. It is fantastic. So sometimes we hear people talking about circularity. These people are walking the talk
Hmm.
and really creating great examples of circularity in their plants. By doing that, by applying technology, um, circular engineering, if I may say, they continue to improve their carbon footprint and
Hmm.
therefore the GHG savings of the ethanol that we produce. But let me say something, Alicia, here. In our biorefineries, we not only produce, as they do, for example, in Latin America when they use sugarcane, because we use grains.
Okay.
As you know, in a grain you have both the starch fraction and also the other fractions.
Hmm.
The lipidic fraction, the fiber fraction, the protein fraction. So
Hmm.
what we do is that basically we fraction the different components of the grain, and in a grain, the starch that you find is energy. Nature uses starch as a way to store energy. What we do in our biorefineries is to take that starch and basically, being energy, we transform it into energy. In
Hmm.
this case, the ethanol that we produce. But then all the other fractions, they are going to produce feed and food, protein rich ingredients, which are later on to, for example, create alternatives to meat.
Hmm. Yeah, so there's continued innovation around how to lower those carbon emissions, how to make the most out of your byproducts. What about the ag side? Have you seen a lot of improvement in reducing carbon emissions in the ag side in Europe?
What do you mean? In which side? I didn't understand the
On
one.
the
In which?
agricultural sector, have
Ah,
you
well, outside. Yeah,
seen?
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, this is a crucial area. This is a crucial area. I mean, farmers, I think they are learning on how to improve the carbon footprint of agriculture.
Mhm,
There are certain practices that make a real difference. For example, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations,
mhm,
they propose conservation agriculture, and conservation agriculture has like three axes that have a great contribution to higher sustainability and reduce GHG emissions. The first one is reduced soil work, reduced tillage.
mhm.
This is crucial because you also will start not only to increase organic matter, but also to to um, to reduce to capture carbon on the soil. Second, to have the use of cover crops,
Mhm.
and you can use cover crops in an intelligent way when you find some uses to those
Yeah.
cover crops. And third, cover crops play a key role in increasing soil biodiversity,
Mm.
an amazing role. And I mean, those roots from these cover crops, these are food for the soil biodiversity, Alicia.
Yeah.
And then finally, sound rotations, not monocultures, but
Sure.
sound rotations that help to increase the sustainability of agricultural production. So yeah, indeed, ag, the ag side can play a very important role in this sense going forward.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a really important part of the message to note how far bioethanol has continued to come over the past couple of decades in terms of
Yeah.
lowering those carbon emissions from the very beginning with the agriculture side up through manufacturing and production.
Indeed, and probably we'll have to find ways to kind of enable some coordination with agricultural operations so we
Mhm.
can have an impact in improving farming operations and also for farming to play a role in this value chain of this social value that I mentioned before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, out of the producers that are in your organization and across Europe, how much bioethanol is produced over the continent?
So in Europe, we produced in 2022 4.4 million tons of renewable ethanol.
Okay.
But actually, Alicia, we produce more food and feed than ethanol. We produce
Mm.
6 million tons of protein rich food and feed. We also produced some corn oil,
Okay.
and we also captured around 1 million tons of biogenic CO2.
Wow.
This biogenic CO2, which is later used for different uses. So 4.4 million tons of ethanol, 6 million tons of protein rich food and feed, around 1 million tons of corn oil, and 1 million tons of biogenic CO2, which
That's
biogenic CO2 is becoming more and more valuable. We are finding more and more
Yep.
uses, and biogenic CO2 is the purest form of CO2 that you can produce. So it's a really high quality CO2.
Yeah. And so, what are some examples of where these products would go into? So, you've got bioethanol going into gasoline or maybe industrial use. What about the other co products? Where do those go?
Very, very right. So in the case of ethanol, most of it is going for fuel. Is 85% is going for fuel,
Okay.
and then like 7% for industrial use, and around 7% for food and beverages. And in the case of the protein-rich food and feed, is going to feed producers. They incorporate it on the diets. Um,
And so, that's going for
animals.
cattle, sheep, chickens, livestock.
Dairy cattle, for example, they love these products. These the DGS produced on the biorefineries. I mean, this is really it's great for dairy cattle, but also all the other farming productions. They really play a good role. It's a good protein, and we are finding ways. Our members are finding ways to improve the nutritional value of these proteins. And when it comes to the oil we produce, well, on the protein, very important, more and more the human food use.
Yeah.
it's increasing. We have several of our members that have within their plant some units for this food production, and we see there is an increase in demand
Mm-hmm.
for vegetable protein, and we try to provide a solution to this demand. And then on the oil, I think it's probably going mostly for industrial use, and the biogenic CO2 is being traditionally going to the food industry and to the fizzy drinks.
Yep. Carbonated
Uh,
water.
uh,
Wow.
but more and more we see that it could play a role. I don't know if you heard about these e-fuels. So this is kind of one of the new renewable fuels that we could have in the future, and they are synthetic. You need to produce them, and to produce them, you need renewable electricity to produce hydrogen
Mm-hmm.
by electrolysis, and then you get this hydrogen, and in combination with the biogenic CO2, you can produce these synthetic fuels of the future, which are
Mm-hmm.
actually currently used in some competition, car competitions. It's being used as well. So these are the different uses that we have. As I said,
Yeah.
always this production under a concept of high sustainability and circularity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing to see how many products you can get from a piece of grain. It's really amazing what it contains. And just to note, what is the primary feedstock that's used in Europe? You mentioned you use different grains. What's the primary feedstock being used?
So we used grains produced in Europe, and half of what we use in our plants is wheat. Is maize. I mean, half of
Okay.
it is maize, and then wheat is around one fourth.
Okay.
Then the remaining fourth is divided between other different feedstocks that include as well some residues coming from sugar production,
Mm-hmm.
also some feedstocks which are under the definition of what we call Annex 9 feedstocks in Europe, which are the feedstocks you may use for the production of advanced ethanol. Advanced
Okay.
because it's an advanced process that uses the waste and residues, and those are the main feedstocks that we use. That allow us, Alicia, to take advantage of the composition of these grains. As I said before, the starch
Mhm.
fraction of the grain, the protein fraction, and all the other fractions that we find naturally on the grain.
And for the producers that are doing a variety of feedstocks, do they blend those at the plant or are they all processed separately?
There is a certain degree of flexibility, but they tend to be processed quite separately.
Mhm.
However, I think they are trying to find some ways to use some combination, but I would say the most usual practice would be separate processing.
Mhm. And which countries do you see producing the most?
I would say probably the largest production is in France, followed
Okay.
by Germany. But as I said before, all over Europe. Our members are producing really all over Europe. We tend to be close to the farmers because we use at the end European grain.
Mhm. And so the amount that's being produced right now, is that sufficient for the needs on the continent, or does Europe also import bioethanol to supplement?
No, Europe imports definitively. We import ethanol. We need to import some part of our total demand.
Mhm.
The main sources for these imports are, I think, recently the number one is Pakistan.
Okay.
There are very large volumes of ethanol coming in from Pakistan recently, and then is the US and Brazil. I think
Okay.
the main places where we import from. I think I would say in this order: Pakistan, the US, and Brazil.
And what are the volumes that are needed in Europe? What is your current blending? Do you have a blending mandate or a standard that's used across the board?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alicia. So the standard should be E10, so up to 10% ethanol in
Okay.
the blend with gasoline. And actually, most European member states are at E10. But a couple of countries are still like in an anachronic situation, still with E5 mandates nationally. One of them, my national country, the country I come from, Spain, and the other one is Italy. I mean, with this, we have this anachronic situation. But I
Okay.
think all Europe has already moved, all the rest of Europe have already moved to E10. And actually, Alicia, we are at the moment discussing in the European Committee for Normalization the conditions for a standard on E20. So
Hmm.
E20 could become a reality in Europe in a few years' time. So this
Wow.
is currently being discussed by experts. And once we have kind of this agreement, we will be moving into a standard. And of course, once we
I
move
really
into
agree.
E10, we will
Uh-huh.
have an increased demand.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You're going to have to either expand operations on the continent or bring in additional imports.
Yeah, we'll have to see. And of course, there will be also additional demand for advanced ethanol, the one produced from waste and residues, because this is the
Sure.
one that under European regulation is needed for aviation fuel or maritime fuel. Doesn't make a lot of sense if the rest of the world moves other way. I think in the US, you're considering to move to a kind of methodology that will allow the opportunity to use also materials produced from farmers in the production of aviation fuel,
Hmm.
renewable aviation fuel, renewable stuff. So, I mean, Europe will have to see at some moment how to proceed this because we should not remain an island in that sense from the
Yeah.
rest of the world.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you can provide a little of the history of bioethanol in Europe. I talked to an individual last week, and they were talking about bioethanol in South and Central America and how there were certain incentives put in place that really helped boost the growth of bioethanol. And now I believe it's E27 is just standard, and then it goes up from there across many parts of the continent. And so, curious what that looked like in Europe.
Well, it would not be as a rosy picture as in Brazil. I mean, what Brazil did is amazing. So early and so well, and I think with good um, um, regulations that ensure kind of a sustainable use. So that's brilliant. In the case of Europe, I mean, the ethanol production is very old in the sense that we had some oversupply of wine.
Hmm.
So we have for some time a regulation that mandated distillation of wine excedents. So we have some supply of this kind of wine alcohol
Okay.
in the market for many years. I mean, early on for the production of brandies and those things.
Mhm.
So some other Europe countries like Spain, Italy, especially, were countries where you have significant production of renewable ethanol, biomass ethanol, since more than 100 years.
Mm.
Really old production. So that was kind of the traditional uh, biomass ethanol production in Europe. It's still very significant, very important.
Mhm.
Still using some of these distillation, uh, crisis distillations from time to time. And kind of this production of ethanol in this biorefinery using grain is something that started around 20 years ago to respond to this need to the fossilized transport.
Mhm.
So a number of investors, especially farmer co-ops, invested in these plants, in these 50 biorefineries we have in Europe based on grain. And we have a recent history. It's a history of 20 years
Yeah.
and hopefully a history that will continue for the foreseeable future, contributing to create a social value in different needs.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you're looking at moving to E20, and so if that took place, that would be a big accomplishment in a relatively short amount of time. What do you see as some of the challenges for that sort of expansion?
Well, I think the technical challenges are very simple. Just the definition of the standard. So, and I think the vehicles, a large percentage of the vehicles already on the road are already prepared for
Mm.
E20. So that should not bring any challenge. So in that sense, we are quite ready in Europe to move to E20. It should be a very easy transition, the same way it was an easy transition with E10. We have other uses of ethanol as well that we are looking into. For example, when it comes to advanced ethanol, Alicia, we have these uses on aviation. We have these
Hmm.
uses on maritime. I think at some moment Europe will have to reconsider this and also allow the use of grain-based ethanol for also these applications.
Hmm.
But also, Alicia, more and more, we see an increased demand for biopolymers. You know, all the packages we use made with plastic polymers.
Hmm.
I mean, these plastic polymers are produced with fossil petrol. Eh?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is an increase in social demand to move away from the use of fossil packaging and move into renewable packaging.
Hmm.
And we see some leading brands now acting on this and finding sources of renewable packaging. And ethanol, I think, will play a role as a feedstock for the
Hmm.
production of renewable polymers to produce this renewable packaging. Some leading brands are already acting on it.
Wow. So there are still a lot of opportunities for bioethanol to continue expanding and developing and creating additional co-products that could be used.
Absolutely. Let's not forgetting cooking, especially in Africa.
Yeah.
I think we all share a mission to make it happen and to really use all these families that use these small stoves for cooking.
Mhm.
And I think we all share a responsibility to enable sustainable and healthy fuels for
Yeah.
them to use.
Yeah, definitely. And Europe has been quite supportive of putting funds toward clean cooking in Africa, especially. And so we hope to continue to see that grow, especially within the bioethanol sector as more and more education comes out around it and we see more players get involved with the field. That we would continue to have that support from Europe and that it would grow as well.
Yeah, and we see more market presence in the retail of
Hmm.
renewable ethanol. So there is a very famous retail chain here, very popular in short time. It's a kind of a newcomer, but it's become very popular. It's
Hmm.
called Action, and if you go to one of these Action retailers that you have here in Europe, you will see the 1 liter bottle of a bioethanol.
Oh,
So yeah, it's becoming kind of a more present at retail level. Yeah, and I think it's mainly for use on these stoves at
okay.
homes, for decorative purposes, for heating
Hmm.
purposes sometimes. So
Okay.
this is becoming more present at domestic level here in Europe.
Oh, interesting. So you are actually seeing bioethanol stoves play a larger role in households as well in Europe.
It's increasing. It's probably something still growing,
Yeah.
but increasing.
Well, that's interesting because the first stoves that were put into the market for clean cooking were originally produced by Dometic, which is a European company. And then that stove branch has since been bought by Clean Cook. But it's interesting to see that that technology is still there and being used and could continue to expand in cooking and heating for Europe as well.
Yeah, and I think there are some leading ethanol producers in the U.S. really taking a very responsible role in enabling that, in making that happen.
Mm.
So I think we need to acknowledge the role of these companies. I think is Poet one of them, and
Hmm.
really having a very socially aware role in enabling this, in making it happen,
Yeah.
enabling these kind of stoves that can be used by these families in Africa, and I think that this is a great work they are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. The private sector has a huge role that they can play in this space, and the investment that comes from private sector is incredibly important to expanding bioethanol and clean cooking across many regions in the world. So, yeah, very, very good point there. That it's important for them to be involved as well, not just multilateral organizations. So going back quickly to, there's a lot of education that plays a role in helping people understand the social impact of transitioning someone from wood and charcoal to a clean cook stove. Do you have to do a lot of consumer education as well around the transportation sector?
Uh, Let me give you an example, Alicia, here that I think is quite good. Um, in France, I mean, we talk about E10 and E10, E20.
Hmm.
In France, they have E85.
Okay.
E85 is available in France because it was a social demand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you may have remembered at some moment there was a protest in France of the so-called yellow vests. Some people that were demanding access to, among other things, more affordable fuels.
Mm,
And the French government responded, enabling this option of E85, which the cost is around half of the
mm,
cost of the other gasoline.
yep.
So it has a very important social role. And if you go to LinkedIn and you search for E85, you
Mm-hmm.
will quickly go into a community of E85 users. In French, they call it la communauté super ethanol, the super ethanol community. And they are posting all the time. They are sharing testimonials. It's
Mm-hmm.
very active. So it's a way where somehow there is some education by sharing experiences, sharing testimonies,
Mm-hmm.
um, sharing some learnings. They use a special thing called the kit that once you install it in your car, I mean, you just
Mm-hmm.
need to go to garage and you say, I want to install the kit. Your car will be able to use E85,
Yep.
even if it is a very old car, and you will be used to use this kind of a cheaper, more socially inclusive fuel option.
Mm-hmm.
And they are talking to each other in social media. So I think this is a great example of some
Yeah.
education, which is not like only coming from one source to others, but it is where people really share with others and help others to see
Mm-hmm.
these benefits. I would suggest your listeners to go and try to look if they want for this about this information on how these French users are sharing their experiences in social media.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good. It's a good example on how we can help others as well to continue advancing on reducing our own sustainability footprint
Yeah.
or
Well, and
improving our
that's
sustainability.
yeah, and that's the best advocate, right? When you have a consumer telling other consumers how well something works or how good a product is, then that carries a lot of weight, I think sometimes more than when you have the manufacturer, the producer trying to tell you how good their product is.
Well, which is good. We need that. We need people to explain us how these stoves work and
Mhm.
how they can be used, and but also these other uses and these other
Yeah.
experiences. I think everything plays a role in this education.
Yeah. No, there are a lot of synergies between the cooking sector and the transportation sector. And, now that we can utilize the same base fuel for both technologies, it really opens up opportunity for imports and exports and expanding agriculture and creating additional trade opportunities around the world.
Absolutely, and more with a lower GHG footprint. The ethanol that
Exactly.
is produced around the world, and I think in Europe we are leading the way. We are really getting close to zero GHG. So that's the future.
Definitely. Yeah. So we talked about bioethanol in kind of a more general sense here and how it pertains to Europe today. But because this podcast really does come back to cooking around the world, I have a food related question for you. And that is, what is the first thing that you learned to cook and what did you use to cook it with?
I used to cook early age simple things, but there is an image that comes fresh to mind.
Hmm.
Um, it was in a tiny apartment in the Canary Islands. I was doing my military service over there, and I had
Okay.
a really tiny kitchen. And I think I was using one of these kind of stoves as well.
Oh,
I don't know if it's ethanol based, but it was one of these small stoves.
a small camp
And
stove.
in the Canary Islands, there is some good fresh fish. And for me, it was the first time I was cooking this fresh vieja, is called, is the name of this local rockfish. And I had
Okay.
the piece, and I was using a flat pan to try to have some kind of I don't exactly think what I was doing, but some kind of a mix between a la plancha and roasted.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster, Alicia. I think you see the flat, I think the fish got stuck to the pan and it was destroyed. But let me tell you, Alicia, to me, it tasted delicious, that fish.
You put the effort in to cook it, so you were going to eat it.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, it was a pleasure to have you on the show today, David, and I'm just really grateful for your insight and expertise and filling our listeners in on what bioethanol looks like in Europe and what the future of it looks like in that continent as well.
It's a pleasure, Alicia. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening. With over a third of the world's population lacking access to modern solutions and cooking with solid and polluting fuels like wood, charcoal, and kerosene, there are huge global impacts in multiple sectors. Pivot is passionate about opening access to household energy options around the world that also lead to reduced emissions, improved health outcomes, environmental protection, greater purchasing power, gender equity, and so much more. Join us for these personal conversations with farmers, fuel producers, distributors, stove manufacturers, policymakers, and consumers to learn about the dynamics that influence how people cook around the world. Please reach out to us at hello@pivotcleanenergy.org to find out how you can get involved. And we'd also be grateful if you found this information valuable and pass it along to friends, family, colleagues, your mailman, your grocer, anyone you know, and find some way to engage. Don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts like LinkedIn and Twitter. Check out our website at pivotcleanenergy.org. And of course, follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts so you can catch the next episode when it drops.